Well, hello everybody. Welcome to another live stream on History Right podcast. And today I'm joined by Alan Bondar. Alan Bondar is the author of the book, which this live stream is named after, titled "How to Kill God the Easy Way." And I have a link to purchase the book in the description below, and also in the pinned comment after this stream is over. Alan was the lead pastor and founder of the Lift Church in Fort Myers, Florida, before leaving Christianity. And I have a link to his website as well in the description below, and also to his YouTube channel and other YouTube channels that he frequently appears on as well. And with that being said, thank you for joining me today, Alan.
Hey, thank you for having me, Jacob. This is an absolute pleasure.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for joining me. So the first thing I want to start off with is, can you take us to the beginning? How did you first become a Christian?
I grew up in a Christian home. So for all intents and purposes, there really was never a time where I wasn't already believing in God and in Jesus and, the whole nine yards. But in the more mainstream Baptist type denominations, which is kind of what I grew up in, it was more like Church of Christ, but, similar vein as Baptist. Of course, Church of Christ has baptism as a necessity, but now we're getting into theology. But my point is, I was raised in that type of environment where there had to be a point in time where you professed faith, made a declaration, and then got baptized, right? And that was the essential elements. Whereas if I was raised Reformed, I could have just said, "Oh, I was just always a believer," which is what I came to believe later in my life. But to answer your question simply, so I was raised in that environment. There came a time in my life where I was like, oh, I understand now. I need to verbally confess Jesus and get baptized. And so I did that. But I did it 3 times because the first time was with my sister when I was, I think, around 6 or 7. She taught me the gospel. And so I became a believer. I confessed. But apparently I didn't understand the gospel well enough, according to the pastor at the time. So he wouldn't let me get baptized. So that didn't take. And then I became a Christian at a Steve Green concert again. That was a singer that is a very good singer, not my style of music, but very good singer. And anyhow, I raised my hand at that to confess Christ, and apparently still wasn't sufficient. And then actually it's the other way around. I walked an aisle at a church, and at the same church with the pastor there, and my proclamation wasn't sufficient there either. It was a Steve Green concert. And then I met with the pastor and explained the gospel, and that was sufficient. They baptized me. And supposedly that was the date that I was saved. And that was around 9 years old.
Mm. Now, what led you to become the founder of the Lift Church in Fort Myers, and you subsequently becoming their lead pastor?
So when I was at, so I'd gone through quite a journey of theology, moving from, Church of Christ to Baptist, going to college, becoming more equipped and understanding the doctrine of dispensationalism, which is the traditional mainstream theology of the church that by and large you're going to hear in most churches. Second coming of Christ is still in the future, the rapture, the whole 9 yards. And I journeyed through a lot of theology through my years. I ended up getting into Reformed and seeing what's called partial preterism, which meant some of the prophecies actually were in the past, not in the future. Such as Matthew 24, it was describing the destruction of Jerusalem instead of the end of the world. So I was like, oh, that makes sense. So then I journeyed there, went through some other, small different sects like, oh my goodness, I can't even think of what they call it. Just a minute. Perspectives on Paul, Auburn Avenue, those kinds of things. But they were like kind of minor tours. And then eventually, after a while I was working at a church as a youth pastor, that's where I finally saw full preterism and realized, oh, all of the prophecies have been fulfilled in the past. And preterism, that word means all past fulfilled. It's a Latin word. So it just basically essentially means past fulfilled. So I became a full preterist, and I realized, oh my goodness, there's no texts in the Bible that actually teach the future coming of Christ. They're all placing it in 70 AD at the destruction of Jerusalem. They're all matching up with Matthew 24. So when I became a full preterist, I could no longer work at that church that I was working at, because it was a futurist church. It was Reformed, and partial preterism was okay, but I crossed that line of full preterism. So I could no longer work there. So I didn't know what to do, and I said, well, and by the way, I was in the process of planting a daughter church while I was there, and this is a church in Florida as well. And so I was in the process. I had 7 classes left to go in seminary. And so we were working through those classes, and at the end of that, we were going to attempt to plant a daughter church. So I had a group of people that I was praying with that was going to be my launch team. And then full preterism came around, and here I was. I was like, oh, well, what do I do now? I mean, this was my plan. I was going to plant the church, so I don't have the support of another church anymore. But what else are we going to do? We wanted to still have a church, so me and that group, we all decided to just start a church and give it a shot. And so that's how Lift Church started. Although when we first started, we went through two different names. We started out as Reformed. What were we called? Reformed something church, Reformed Preterist Church or something. I can't even remember for some reason. It's just evading me. And then the next name, it's been a long time. The next name was New Covenant Eyes Church, because I wrote a book called New Covenant, Reading the Bible Through New Covenant Eyes. That was my first book. So I was like, hey, there's a cool name. Turns out that's kind of a creepy name. Whenever I would tell people, they'd be like, New Covenant Eyes? Like, what are you staring at us? It was just really kind of goofy. So I was like, that didn't work. So then we ended up with Lift Church, because the core values of our church were love, integrity, freedom, and truth. And we realized that spelled the acrostic Lift. So we ended up going with Lift Church, and that's how we became Lift Church. And that's how I became the lead pastor of Lift Church.
So now take us through the journey of how you came to kill God and leave Christianity. What happened?
I came to kill God. Yes. So once so the church fell apart because there was a number of things that had nothing to do with me leaving Christianity that just caused a rift and mess up. I had a divorce, and so we ended up just shutting down the church because nobody was in a capacity in the leadership team that was willing to maintain it without me. So we shut down the church. And of course, I went through a pretty severe depression for a couple of years, because losing my ex-wife and my dog and my house, and then, the girlfriend that I had after my marriage fell apart, and it's just nothing seemed to be working out. I just was falling apart, but I was already in a major depression anyway. So I went through a lot of therapy, a number of years of therapy, actually, getting me back on board. I had moved in with my parents back in Maryland. So I was living in Florida. I moved back to Maryland because I was a mess. I couldn't even stand on my own 2 feet. And I mean that not only metaphorically, but quite literally. So it was a very bad time in my life. But through therapy, I started to get healed, started to get stronger, started to get my mind back, get back on my feet, become a man again, so to speak, where I was able to start to think straight and know what I wanted to do. And I wanted to get back into ministry. I had no doubt. I absolutely wanted to find a way to replant the church. I just truly believed that was what I was supposed to do. And during that process of thinking about it and trying to plan out my future, the most bizarre thing happened. Because I used to go on prayer walks or prayer runs as well. And one day I was taking this walk. And so I had met with, so I had already had these thoughts in the back of my mind, like some deep thoughts. Like I had already journeyed so far from what I was raised in. And here I ended up a full preterist. And you start to question, like, why is there so much disagreement? What is going on here? Like, why can't anybody else see what I see? And I'm like, this is right. This makes sense, but nobody else. So things were just already kind of out of whack and making no sense. And then I met up with a friend of mine who we were like really close friends a number of years back. And we had lost contact for a few years. And I had no idea that he had already left Christianity. And we met, and he had told me, and I was like, what? There's life outside of Christianity? And he was like, oh, it's wonderful. And he was like, Christianity's a mind virus. And I was like, what? But I had already gone through enough questioning that I was like, this is fascinating. That's wild. The most amazing thought to me was, there is life outside of Christianity, I guess. And the fact that my friend is enjoying it, and he's essentially giving me permission to leave, because, when you're that stuck in something, it's very scary to just say, I'm leaving on my own. He actually, was the one person, the catalyst, that said, yeah, you can get out, you can leave, and it's great out here. I was like, wow. But I wasn't ready just then, but it got me thinking. The next day I was out on one of my prayer walks, and here I am in the middle of praying, And I'm halfway through a sentence and I just literally stopped. And I just paused and looked around and I said, what am I doing? I'm talking to the air. And right then and there, I literally said to myself, I think I'm an atheist. I don't know what happened. It was like the last card from the House of Cards Foundation fell and just the whole house collapsed, And I couldn't make any more sense of it. And there was no God listening to me. And I realized that. And all along throughout the years, as I had to pull myself back out of the rut and the depression that I was in, he was never there. There was no God there. I literally had to do it myself with the help of my therapist. And I thought it was people that helped me. And I know the argument, well, God's using people. Well, and that sounds good. But at some point, when you kind of get to a point where you're like, all of the layers of brainwashing that you had that made you believe, or indoctrination that made you believe that God is real and you need God and you're a sinner in need of a savior, one step at a time, I was able to trace it back to my childhood and follow my life and realize, wow, I had been removing the brainwashing every step of the way and didn't even realize it until that very last step where I said, what am I doing? I'm talking to the air. That was it. That was the last layer. And I became an atheist.
Yeah, that's awesome. Christians will often say, oh, I can bring examples of this person over here converted and he got out of depression. He stopped doing drugs. He's a better person. They don't like talking about how the reverse happens, where people leaving out and become a better person.
Right. No, you're right. It's definitely uncomfortable when they hear that. And to that point, when you go to church, you hear all these testimonies of how Jesus saved these marriages and saved these people from drugs, but you don't often hear of, they don't put somebody on stage to tell the testimony of how they came to Christ and he saved them and took them out of drugs. And then 3 months later, they went back to drugs and are living on the street. They don't put them back up there to tell that story. They leave that part out. They only tell the parts where, it's victorious. So, yeah.
Yeah, because it's inconvenient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it certainly is.
So now I want to ask you about, what were some of the major issues that you eventually came to have with Christianity? Let's start with morality, how they try to say that, or if you're an atheist, you can't have objective morality. What's your response to that?
So my response to that is that as a Christian, you are actually basing your morality on the same thing I'm basing my reality. And that is precisely my choice in what I'm going to choose as my standard. Christians always come and they say, well, God is the objective standard. God's the transcendent standard. No, God's the transcendent standard, or the objective standard that you chose to submit to. So you're making him the standard. Even if God is some out there transcendent standard, you're still, as an individual, choosing to submit to that standard. So you're making your standard by your personal choice. I do the same thing. It's no different. I have a society. I like their standard. I say, hey, that's a good one. I'm going to go with that. Group of people, right. We make decisions and we roll with it. I'm choosing what my standard is going to be. It's no different than the way Christians live. Why do you think it is that Christians hop from church to church to church? Because they don't like something here, so they'll go to this one because this one does what they want. That's called choosing your standard. You're not actually following some transcendent standard like you think you are. You're just making the same choices that I'm making. So it's a deceitful lie. I mean, it's the brainwashing has you thinking that God's some transcendent standard when in fact you're literally doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's a good point, because you also talk about in the book about how Christianity is very fluid. People just hopping around to different denominations of Christianity because they don't like something. They don't like the values of that denomination, so they prefer a different denomination. So they're doing the very same thing that they're accusing atheists of doing.
Correct. Yep.
So now I want to ask you specifically about the fluidity and the dogma of Christianity. What did you see specifically about the very serious contradictions among different Christians, in their conflicts with each other regarding different denominations of the faith?
So if I'm understanding your question, what is it that made me journey that way?
No, let me rephrase. What What do you make of the fluid of the dogma?
Okay, so in my book, you're talking about the chapter where I talk about fluid dogma there? Is that what you're
Yeah,
referring to? Okay.
that's it.
So in my mind, the way I think we need to make decisions and live based on the knowledge we have, um, you can absolutely be dogmatic about your position within the parameters of the information that you have at any given time. Because obviously, if you don't know what information you don't know, you can only work with what you do know. So it'd be silly to be like, well, I can't make any decisions. I'm just going to be a paraplegic and just sit here and do nothing. Well, you gotta make decisions for your life based on what you do know. So whenever you have information, you make decisions based upon those parameters. So when it comes to doctrine and theology, or even philosophy, now that I'm no longer in Christianity, it's the same. You have information and you say, okay, what's the best sense that I can do with this information? So, for example, when it came to me becoming a full preterist, I looked at the time texts and I looked at the audience relevance, and I saw problems there with futures. And I was like, this doesn't add up. There's no way that Jesus is, that these people in Matthew 16, 27, 28, some standing here will not taste death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. There's no way those people are still alive 2,000 years later. That's far sillier than saying Jesus came back when he said he did, if you're going to believe the prophecy in the first century, and then say, okay, what would be an alternative understanding of this text then? And you look at the language and you see, oh, okay, this matches the metaphors throughout the Old Covenant. So, maybe Jesus was teaching the same thing throughout the Bible, like father, like son. God comes riding on the clouds. God comes destroying nations with all this cosmic metaphoric language. What if the same thing would happen in the New Covenant? And you're like, oh, well, that makes sense. And so I had the parameter of information. So full preterism worked. And I said, okay, I need to abandon futurism because this now makes more sense because I got new information. And that's where the fluid part comes in. So prior to that, I had dogma and what I believed. And then I saw something new, something I hadn't seen before, new information. And I said, okay, I gotta bring this into my worldview now. And I have to allow it to restructure it to make sure that I'm not ignoring something that is actually there. And so I'm fluid in my thinking, but I also become dogmatic once I allow that new information in. And until new information presents itself, I'm able to hold strong to that. And I think I can be confident there. So that's what I mean by fluid dogma. When I became an atheist, the same principle happened. I was dogmatic as a full preterist, as a Christian. And then I started to question all these things. And I realized there's no evidence whatsoever for the existence of God. We're basing this whole thing on faith. It's all guesswork. It's all hoping. Mostly it's Pascal's wager. We're afraid that if we're wrong, we're going to, die. So we just make the decision and say, I'm going to live for God because it's safer this way. And ultimately that's what we're doing, even though, Christians don't like to hear that. So they'll call it faith and they'll call it a genuine heart and everything. No, it's not. It's fear. It's just genuinely fear. And I demonstrate that in my book. And I know that's hard for Christians to accept, which is why I say, read my book. I'm challenging you to read it because it will open your mind to see things you are not seeing clearly right now. But my point is to answer this question. I was dogmatic. New information presented itself that I had to think about. And I changed my worldview because now I have the information that I have. So I think we have to live that way. And if you're not doing that, then you're not growing. You're not learning. You're not evolving. You're just stuck in a rut. And I think that's a bad way to live. I'd rather everyone, become something ludicrous out there than just believe something for no reason. Like, find information and incorporate it and make your worldview based on that information. I think that's the best way to live. That's my opinion.
So that takes me to the song that you talk about close to the beginning of your book, Addicted to Jesus. What is that song about?
Oh my goodness. So that was one of the songs that's the DC Talk. Is that the DC Talk one or is that the Carmen one? I can't remember.
I don't remember either.
I know DC Talk raps on both of them, so I can't remember which one it was. But anyhow, it really doesn't matter for this point. But whichever one it is, that was the first time as I was. So let me back up. About 2 years ago, Jennifer Fishburne did an interview with me, and it was the first time I had come out publicly and said, okay, yeah, I'm an atheist. Because she challenged me and to come out of my shell, and I said, all right, why not? Let's give this a shot. But she asked me on the show, why did you become an atheist? Much like you did tonight. And I was like, I don't know. Like at the time, I didn't know. At the time, it just felt like it just happened. That's what it felt like to me. I was like, I don't know. One day I was walking, and the next day I wasn't. I was like, I don't know. I just didn't care. But then when somebody asks me a question like that, the fluid dogma thing, I become a dog on a bone. I'm like, all right, I need to figure this out. That's where the book came from, actually. If it wasn't for Jen asking that question, this book would never have been written. But I needed to know. I had to know what made me leave. And I bet you it's the same reason other people leave, and I bet you it would help other people leave. And I was like, I need to write this as I'm figuring it out. So in that journey, I kept asking myself the question, what is making me leave? So what made me leave? So I entrenched myself back into the Christian world. I started listening to Christian music again, reading the Bible, not praying because I didn't really believe in that anymore, but just the things that would allow me to hear once again from the Christian community what's going on. Like, so I could kind of figure out what was it about it that I loved, what was so wonderful, why did I leave it? And then I heard that song, Addicted to Jesus, Addicted to God, Addicted to Jesus. And I was like, it hit me like a ton of bricks, Jacob. That was the moment that I said, I'm writing this book. I just knew it right then and there. I knew exactly what the reason was. So when I was, okay, so now I'm going to piggyback on that, tell another story, and then I'm going to tie them together. Is that all right?
Sure.
All right. So I used to be a heavy smoker for years, and I was highly addicted to nicotine. And for most of those years, I thought it was the most wonderful thing in the world. I was so happy to be a smoker. You couldn't convince me otherwise. I would tell people, and they would say, that's bad for you. And I'll be like, I don't know. It makes me feel good when I smoke. So I would say stupid stuff like that. But I was absolutely convinced. And I did not think there was any way that I ever wanted to quit. And then eventually, I started to feel kind of bad. It just didn't, your lungs, and you're coughing all the time. And then you realize, you're never focused on people because you're always wanting to go out and get that cigarette. And so it started to disturb me. And I got tired of it. And I was like, okay, I want to quit. And I found I couldn't quit. I was frustrated to no end. I tried multiple times, and I just kept getting the shakes and the withdrawal. And then I realized one day I was addicted to smoking, and I didn't want to admit that, but I was addicted. I always used to say, oh, I can put this down anytime I want. Turns out I couldn't. And then I read a book on, quitting smoking. And it helped. It talked about removing brainwashing that makes you think you love this addiction. And once the brainwashing is removed, it turns out quitting is actually very, very easy. Because it's not hard to not do what you don't want to do. So once you realize you actually don't want this in a genuine way, and you realize all the things that you actually hate about it, it's just like one day you're just like, oh, this is disgusting. I don't like this. And you're just done. And that's what happened to me. I was just done. So now I'm going to tie that back in here. So here I am hearing this song, Addicted to Jesus. And that's when it hit me. I said to myself, wait a second. What if the addiction is the problem? What if that's what's going on here? What if Christians are addicted to Jesus, addicted to God, addicted to Christianity, just like people get addicted to substances or behavioral addictions or social addictions or whatever they are? What it comes down to is the reason it's so hard to quit those addictions is because you're brainwashed into thinking you need it. You can't live without it. You're desperate for it. And I started to hear more songs and more propaganda from the Christian world of these shirts and addicted to Jesus, addicted to God. But then more than that, like songs and sermons about how desperate we are for Jesus, like a deer pants for water, my soul pants for you. And it started to become really evident to me that Christians are desperate for God because they think they need something they don't. And I thought, wow, I think there's the key. And all I have to do is remove the brainwashing that makes them think they need something they don't, namely God, because they've been given a void that they don't actually have, namely sin. And they end up working hand in hand. You need God because you're a sinner, right? And, without God, there's no need for sin because sin is an offense against the holy God. So that was it. That was the moment for me. And that's what this book is all about. It's about, number one, demonstrating your addiction to God, and then removing the brainwashing layer by layer by layer, just like I did in my life, until you get to the end of that, and you're just suddenly like, what am I doing? And you no longer desire God anymore because you don't need him. So that's essentially the long and short of it all.
Can you tell us about the Evangelium statistics? How old are people when they get saved?
So by and large, the middle school through high school age is the predominant time when people come to Christ. But you start them off early, even as children, and you raise them in it, and then they'll stick. But even when it comes to evangelism, when you go out, there's a reason why, you technically you try to build youth ministries like they do, because you can reach friends and you can bring them in and you can have fun, and then you can preach the gospel and they'll come believe it and be saved. Adults don't tend to convert that quickly or that easily. It happens, but it's not by the droves like it does with teens. So statistically speaking, and this was a Barna research thing, and also there was another Nazarene church, I think, did a research thing. I have it in my book. I can't remember it exactly, but there was actual research done, and they targeted those age groups with the research, realizing that that's where most of the salvations are coming from. But anyway, so yeah, that's what that's about.
I'm going to take a couple of super chats real quick, and then I'll get back to my questions. I Fish and Ty, thank you for your super chat. Are you a mythicist and an atheist, or just atheist?
I'm not a mythicist. I'm an atheist, but I would call the Bible a mythology. And I think Jesus, if he existed, it was like the stories of him as the Messiah, the resurrected dude, and the born of a virgin. That's all legend. So it's very possible he existed. I'm not certain he did. I don't really find a lot of evidence for it. But if he did, I'm cool with that. But he's definitely not the legend that he's made out to be.
Johansson, thank you for your super chat. Did you ever consider your approach, practice, methodology of prayer was incorrect? Did you fast 3 days for a full moon, abstain from the material?
No, nor did I have any desire to ever do that again. I have fasted in the past as a Christian, but no, 3 days before a full moon. I'm not sure I find anything in the Bible about that, so I don't know why I would do that.
So now I want to ask you about the problem of faith versus evidence.
Okay. Is that it? That's the question?
Yeah.
All right. Problem of faith versus evidence. Sure. So Christianity is essentially based on faith alone. Even in Hebrews 11, faith is the evidence of things unseen, the assurance of things hoped for. Faith is the evidence. Faith is the evidence. It isn't faith is some of the evidence plus the empirical data and evidence for the God. No, faith is the evidence. That's it. That is the biblical teaching on how a person comes to know God and becomes saved. It's just strictly faith. The problem with evidence is it, number one, contradicts faith. It adds to faith. It shows that there's more than faith necessary. And in my mind, the way I understand it and the way I think Scripture teaches is that when you add things like evidence, it devalues the grace of God. It takes away from the sheer nature of the fact that God himself must awaken you by faith and don't need any evidence. In fact, as Christians, you'd be better off arguing that there is no evidence. We don't need evidence. We don't want evidence. We strictly trust the grace of God to awaken us. And if we have faith, that is it, which is kind of Reformed epistemology. And that's fine. That would be the closest to the argument for Christianity. But even there, they add experience as an element, and that's a whole other rabbit trail that we might ask a question about later. But although that would be an evidence as well, so I guess I can touch on that here. Your personal experience, that is sufficient for me to know God. Well, is it though? Because didn't Joseph Smith have a personal experience, and all these other leaders of the faith and people all around the world, everybody has their own experience, and they all come to believe different gods. So your personal experience, is that really, you're going to trust that? Especially since we really don't know that our experiences are being interpreted correctly. Like In my mind, you're interpreting your experience through the lens of faith rather than the other way around. You want it to be the experience that you have with God, and so you already believe in God. So you're like, oh, well, that experience supports my faith in God. When it doesn't, actually, you got the interpretation in reverse. So faith is contradictory to evidence, but even more so, the greater problem with evidence, especially empirical evidence, and even experiential evidence, is it only takes you, like if you were to think of a football field, you got to get me all the way to the 100-yard line on the other side. You got to get me past the goal line. That's the touchdown. That's where you need to get me. But all of these evidential arguments for the existence of God, they only take you to 50-yard line, maybe. They get you there and they're like, well, look, this is a pointer to God, and this looks like it could be God, and well, this might be God. This is quite possible. And look at all these evidences. Surely all of these things, because they possibly point to God, therefore God. And I'm like, whoa, what do you mean, therefore God? They could also point to a million other possibilities. Oh, well, no, you just have to have faith. Well, if I just have to have faith to get the rest of the way, why did you waste time with the first 50 yards? You might as well have just told me to take faith the whole way. So there's not a single piece of evidence, not a single piece that can cross the 100-yard line, that can cross us to the goal line in defending and demonstrating the existence of God. All you have is pointers that support something you already believe to be true. And that's the brainwashing. You already have this idea intact that God exists and he's the only possibility. And so you have all these apologetic arguments that say, hey, look, this supports it, this supports. Oh, see all of this. It supports exactly what I believe. Therefore, I must be right. No, it doesn't actually mean you must be right. You actually have to demonstrate the existence of God completely. And just because you don't like the alternatives, and just because the alternatives aren't saying we know that we know, and then we're absolutely certain about whatever, that doesn't mean that your position's right. So if A is, science saying evolution and the Big Bang and whatever, and B is God, and you say A is false, and even if you proved it without a shadow of a doubt that A is false, that still doesn't mean that B is true. C might be true, or D might be true, or A and a half might be true. You still have to demonstrate the existence of God with B. And just claiming faith alone is insufficient evidence, but it is also the only grounds you have to be a Christian.
So I'm going to take this super chat real quick. Eastgate Adoptionist, thank you for your super chat. Jacob, would you please ask Don Preston's friend William Bell to be on your channel? Well, East, thank you for your super chat. Yeah, I think so. I think I'll see if William wants to come on. If he wants to.
That'd be a good one.
Super chat. Yeah. So now I want to ask you about the contradictions in the Christian faith. So this also has to do with Bible contradictions. I know, and I know you have a chapter on that. So can you tell us a bit about some of what you can think of are some of the biggest contradictions that you've seen?
Sure. For one, the whole concept of Christian love versus common love. The golden rule or the greatest commandment: love your neighbor as yourself. It actually doesn't work. It contradicts itself. So if I'm supposed to, let me reverse that. If you're supposed to love me as you love yourself, then ideally, you want me to believe what you believe, and vice versa. And if you love me the way I love you, and this constant back and forth, you should therefore believe what I want you to believe, because you want to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And since I want you to believe what I believe, and you want to do unto others as they would have me do unto you, therefore you should just believe what I believe, and I want you to be an atheist. So there you go. That's the best way to apply the Christian love. That's the best way to apply the greatest commandment. And it inherently contradicts itself, because now the greatest commandment doesn't really work because you're an atheist now. So that's a big problem. You have concepts like you let your yes be yes and your no be no. This whole idea of make a definitive statement and that's it. Just run with that. Yet when it comes to things like marriage, Why is marriage a requirement in the Bible? When you start dating somebody, that's a commitment. Let your yes be yes. But that's not enough. Then you need to get engaged. Well, that's a commitment. Why do we need another step then? I've committed. That's my yes. No, you still have to get married because that's the rule. Well, now I have 3 yeses. Why did I need 3 yeses? And some people even add a promise ring to that. When they're dating, so you got 4 yeses. That seems contradictory. Like if my commitment is sufficient, why can't it just my word be enough at the very, very beginning and not require marriage? I'm not saying you can't get married. Have at it. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying to require that from a Christian standpoint as the only right way, and then say, let your yes be yes is a sufficient thing. That should have been the case at the very beginning of the relationship, and it shouldn't require marriage to make that happen. So that's one thing. And there's plenty. I list them out in the book, and I want to encourage people to read the book because you can read them. There's no point in going over all of them here. So I'll just finish with that one.
And what would you say is the difference between Christian love and common love?
So I just defined Christian love. Do unto others they would have you do unto you, and it doesn't really work. Versus common love, where you just care for people, and it's not about doing to them as you would have them do unto you. You care for them in the most logical and common way. If you see someone in need, you just care for them. It probably doesn't look all that different than the Christian intents for the greatest commandment to look. So I'm not suggesting that what you're intending by following the greatest commandment is going to look much different, because it's probably not. I'm probably going to look exactly the same. But if you follow the greatest commandment completely and consistently, you're going to find it contradicts itself, and you're going to run into a lot of problems with it. But most people don't follow it consistently, and that's the real issue.
What do you make of Christians claiming that success depends on God rather than on yourself?
So, obviously, as an atheist, I look in now and I say, okay, when you say you depend on God, what exactly does that look like? And you have to ask yourself, even as a Christian, when you're depending on God, what part is He doing? What part are you doing? You pray, and the answer is, well, if God wills. Okay, so God says yes, no, or maybe. Okay, also unhelpful. So there's no way to ever know whether God's actually doing what you asked or not. It's just random. It's just as random as me living my life without praying. And then depending on God, what exactly did He do in any of your situations that you didn't actually have to do yourself or with the help of somebody else, by which at the very end of it, you turned around and said, oh, to God be the glory. You're literally praising Him just because you think He did something and didn't actually. And I know you think He's doing it because, well, the brainwashing is deep as a Christian, and you absolutely think that God's there doing it. But in reality, the statistics, especially with prayer, there was a study done where, and I have the statistics in my book, there was a study done where it's demonstrated that people who are being prayed for when they were sick actually got worse when the people knew they were being prayed for than if they weren't being prayed for at all. So what we can learn from that is, if you're going to pray for somebody, definitely don't tell them, because apparently they get worse. And that just doesn't seem to make sense to me, but, oh, glory to God, God's doing it. But we just, that's what we do, Jacob. We just throw up the praise, and we don't know why. We really don't. We don't have any evidence whatsoever that God's doing anything, but we just need Him to be the one doing it, because we desperately think we need a God, especially this God, and we need a Savior because we have this sin problem, and it just goes on and on down the track. And that's what I'm doing in the book. I'm trying to remove all of those layers, so you no longer keep ascribing things to a God that isn't even there.
Eastgate Adoptionist, thank you for your super chat. When Paul talked about the 500 witnesses of Jesus in 1 Corinthians 15:6, was he saying they saw Him above in their mind's eye? Have we been too literal of our own resurrections?
No, well, if you take that text, first of all, I'm not even convinced it's real or originally written by Paul or anything. But assuming that text is genuine, Paul is, I would say, talking about 500 literal witnesses that saw Jesus. The problem I have with that text is, if first of all, if Paul even wrote it, the problem I have with it is Paul is saying there were 500 witnesses. I didn't see, I haven't heard from the 500 witnesses. There's no other books where these 500 witnesses wrote anything. We're literally going off the testimony of one man saying, I saw it, and oh yeah, and they saw it, and this guy saw it, and that guy saw it. That's still the testimony of one man. That's not the testimony of 500 witnesses. That's the testimony of one man claiming that there are 500 witnesses. So that's completely insufficient evidence. That's third party hearsay. That's not at all going to stand up in a court of law. So that didn't work. But to answer the question, no, I do think he was literally talking about witnesses, and ironically contradicting his grace by faith alone doctrine. But be that as it may.
So now I want to go back to what you were saying earlier about your deconversion story. So when it became clear to you that you're an atheist, that you're done being a believer, what was it like for you in the days that followed? Did you have issues at all with family members and or friends or anyone else that you knew when you became an atheist?
Yeah, so I kept it quiet for a while. I wasn't ready to come out of the closet. It was an interesting, because my whole family is Christian, most of my friends were Christian, if not all of them. So it was scary for me. It was almost the same fear that I had when I became a full preterist. I didn't have any friends that were full preterists, and quite literally, I thought I was the only idiot on the planet that believed it, because I had not known another full preterist. So I kept it quiet for a while. And I did research, and eventually, found other preterists, and I was like, oh my goodness, there's people like me out there. So I started making contacts, and it started to become, easier and more palatable. Like, okay, this is cool. So similar to that, atheism was the same way. I was quiet for a while, but I started kind of testing the waters, talking to some friends and seeing where they were. Lo and behold, I started to find out some close friends of mine from the past had already become atheists as well. So I was like, you too? I was like, what? So it was mind blowing. I couldn't believe the friends that had escaped already. Jen Fishburne, for example, one of them. So that was absolutely amazing. So it started to become more palatable and more exciting. And I was like, wow, this is cool. So yeah, I kept it quiet from my family and friends that were Christians, but the ones that I was discovering had already become atheists. It was giving me an outlet. And it wasn't until quite literally Jen's podcast, Jen's show, that I came out publicly for the first time. So that was quite interesting.
So what happened after you had come out and your family and other friends that are still Christians found out?
My family was pretty awesome. Don't agree with me, obviously. They pray for my soul daily. They think I'm going to hell. They think I was never a Christian. I was only in it for the money, yada, yada, yada. They got the whole 9 yards. And I know they just don't get it. And they will not read the book. They refuse. And no matter how much I've encouraged them, like, I'm just read a book. That's all I'm asking you to do. See what happens. No, they won't do it, because they know that they know that they know that they know, so like, you can't, if you're that staunch in your Christianity, you're too afraid to read a book, or too unwilling and too stubborn to read a book that might challenge your faith. There's nothing going to help you. I can't get you out like that. You have to be at the place where I was when I was a smoker, saying, this is weird. Something's up here. I don't like the way it feels. I've got some questions. Once you get to that point as a Christian, if you're willing to question, this book will take you the rest of the way. I guarantee it. This is the book for you. If you have any questions as a Christian, you think something's off in any way, shape, or form, this book will clear it up. And even if you have left Christianity and you're an atheist already, or even not an atheist, but just left Christianity, I guarantee you still have some lingering things going on there that you don't even realize. I feel like I've covered the whole gambit in this book. And if I've missed something, I look forward to people telling me so I can, add it in. But yeah, if there's anything you're going to ever encounter, I think it's in this book. It's pretty exhaustive. But anyway, so that was my family, and still to this day is my family. I have a good family. My parents have always been awesome. Even in my book, I talk about how they raised me and how it was very frustrating and challenging because of the strictness or whatever, and going to church and everything. But my parents weren't bad parents. They were just brainwashed like the rest of us, just following what they thought God wanted them to do. So, but it didn't make them bad parents. I wouldn't trade them for the world. I love my parents, and they're still amazing. So, so that's good with my family. Cousins, same thing. Good relationship. Friends, now on this side, I'm like, wow. I sometimes I wonder if they were actually friends. So I had several of them attack me personally, come at me, rip up my past and shed light on it, and tell people about my quote unquote sins, and started harassing me and bringing up other people from my past that did not need to be brought into this, just to defend Jesus. And I was just like, dude, like, what is going on up in here? If you're gonna come at me, come at the things I said, come at my actual arguments. Let's deal with this on a factual level. Don't start attacking us ad hominem. That was just not right. So that really bothered me. And I talk in my book about reconsolidated memory, and that's kind of like a Word document. You have the original document, and over time, every time you add something, you save it, and the original document's gone because you now have the reconsolidated version of it. So memories are much the same way. You remember things over the course of time differently. They're never quite exact as it actually happened. It always changes because your past memory remembers the last memory, and this memory remembers the last memory of the last memory of the last memory. So you never quite can remember exactly how it happened. So it gets modified, and it often gets modified according to the experience you're having at the time. So when I went through my depression, when you're depressed, you feel so alone. It doesn't matter if you have 5,000 people standing at your door trying to help you. You're just like, nobody's there for me. That's the way you feel. So that was what happened to me. I reconsolidated my memory to a point where I truly didn't think there was anybody there for me. When there was, but when I did the interview with Jen, that's the way I told the story as I remembered it. And then I stopped after the interview and listened back, and I said, I wonder if that was true. That can't be right. And I started thinking about factually, were there people, and started thinking about people. And I was like, oh, so I did an addendum, tried to fix it. It's hard to fix something like that, but I tried to be honest, try to come out. And of course, that was unacceptable. I had still friends coming at me, even today, about that. Oh, you're lying. You're trying to trick it. It's about your agenda. And I'm like, really? I'm trying to be as honest and forthright about everything as I can, and it's just, instead of dealing with the facts and the data, they have to attack me personally. And Jacob, I think it's because they don't have anything to say about the facts and the data. They don't have any evidence for the existence of God, nor can they demonstrate anything other than a faith alone religion. So if they're willing to come at me and discuss evidence, I would absolutely and gladly discuss or debate them. And I invite that.
How would you say that most Christians use the Bible?
Most of the time, it's like verse of the day type thing. Read a devotional. I think most Christians don't even crack the Bible open at home. And I say most because I don't want to say all, but that's my opinion. And I say that based on my pastoral experience of 20 years, observing people and talking with them. So maybe I'm wrong, because maybe all of a sudden something's changed dramatically and every Christian started reading their Bible, but I don't think that's the case. I think most of them don't even crack it open at home. And they just bring it to church and read what their pastor tells them, and they go home. But they'll do devotionals and things like that, and they'll do the verse of the day and read the little thing, the blurb that the writer writes. But it's random verses. Like, it's always, and you'll find there's like a handful of verses. Well, I shouldn't say a handful, maybe 100. I don't know, 100. Let's say 100 verses. I'm just throwing out a guess that are applicable to our lives, and they just keep cycling through. Romans 8:28. All things work together for the good of those who love him. What's the one in the Old Testament about expanding the border? God will bless you and expand your border. The verse isn't coming to me. What else is there? John 3:16. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son. And it's verse Romans 8:1. There's now no condemnation for those who are in Christ. So we have these verses that they just feel good, and we love them, and we just can quote them. We got memes about them spreading the internet all over the place, and that's essentially the Christian's version of the Bible. We just love the good feel of the verses that we know. But we don't walk around quoting verses about, God encouraging rape or murder, or, Ezekiel 16, where he's, talking about the breasts and the blood of the virgin Israel, and, wanting to have sex with her and stuff. We don't touch those. Let's leave those alone. Let's not read the verses about how God instructed, people to beat their slaves just to the point where they don't die after 3 days. That's approved. Let's not talk about stealing women from other nations and forcing yourself upon them just to see if you like them. And if you don't, then you can get rid of them. If you choose them, then you have to keep them for life. If you're talking about property, so we don't like those verses. And we definitely don't like people bringing them up, because that just ticks us off. Because now you're just being obstinate, Alan. Now you're just being a jerk, and you're just trying to make stuff up to make the Bible better. No, it's in your Bible. Like, what do you want me to say? You only choose the verses you like. And we hand the Bible to our kids and we say, you should read this. What if your kid stumbles upon these verses? Like, do you not care? We keep smut like that away from our kids at teenage years and younger from other books, because we're just like, bro, you're not ready for that yet. But we hand a Bible to these kids and we expect them to read it. And then we don't. And I don't think most Christians know this stuff's in there. That's the problem. I really don't. Because they're not reading it themselves. And most sermons, they don't teach that stuff. So it's rare that a Christian is actually paying attention to what's going on in the Bible. They're just randomly cherry picking verses. That's the way I see it. That's what I think is going on.
Eastgate Adoptionist, thank you for your super chat. Does the famous double slit experiment in QM show that the building blocks of our reality are not physical until observation? Is that what 2 Corinthians 4:18 is about?
I couldn't tell you. I don't know if that's what 2 Corinthians 4:18 is about. I don't think so, but I don't know. And at the end of the day, I would like to know why that matters. I'm curious.
And for my final question, what would your advice be to someone that's stuck, that's in the middle, can't decide what to do, that there's finding problems with Christianity, but they're struggling to go all the way and leave? What would you say to that person?
I would say read my book. That's what I would say, because the problem is you're stuck. And I know people right now that are stuck, and they know something's up and they want to leave, but they're trapped by whatever reason. Ultimately, it's fear. And until that fear gets removed, you're not going to be able to escape. It's the fear that keeps you trapped in that addiction. It is the same with any other substance or social or behavioral addiction. It's the fear that you can't do without it that keeps you stuck. What I do in the book is I methodically and slowly remove the brainwashing and remove the fear step by step by step. By the end of the book, you will no longer fear hell, judgment, punishment, destruction, any of that. All the fear mongering that the Bible talks. I will remove all that, and you just got to let the book do its job and just read it. It sounds ridiculous, I know. I thought the same thing about the book I read on smoking. Oh, please, but I'm telling you, it works. You just have to let the book do its job. Just read it from beginning to end and see what happens. It will free you from all of that. And I give instructions at the end as well as to next steps and how to handle your situation after you leave. I know that the title of the book is a deterrent for a lot of people. I've had a lot of pushback on that. People tell me, oh, you shouldn't name it that, or you shouldn't have named it that, or whatever. People aren't going to read it. But here's the thing about the title. Number one, it's what the book's about. So it's the most honest title I could have given it. It's quite literally about how to kill God the easy way, so that you're not struggling to leave Christianity. It just literally makes it easy to just walk away and no longer have any attachments to it and not have any fear that you're making the wrong decision. So that's the first thing. The second thing is it's provocative. I think it's catchy. I think it challenges somebody when they look at it. I have a hard time believing anybody can walk by a title like that and not at least take a second look and go, well, that's interesting. I wonder what that's about. So I do think it serves that purpose. But more importantly than anything, the primary reason that title is crucial is because even before you start reading it, I am already removing the brainwashing before you even crack the first page, or before you even crack the cover, because it diminishes right out the gate the idea that God is impossible to defeat. This idea that God exists is impossible to defeat. It shows that there is a way out. It shows that maybe, just maybe, there isn't a God after all. It shows that if there was a God, maybe he can be defeated if somebody else defeated. So there's all these things going on. If you eliminate the power that a substance or a social addiction has over you, that is how you begin removing the brainwashing. So those are the reasons I titled it. And I know that going into it, you're not saying, oh, it didn't work on me. I read the title and I have no interest in reading it because none of those things you said happened to me, except it is happening to you because you're interested. I know you are. You're intrigued, but you just refuse to read it because you're afraid. I think a lot of smokers refuse to read the book I offer them on how to quit smoking because they're afraid to quit. They like their smoking. They think it's wonderful. It's not until you're ready that it's going to work. So, if you're willing to crack that page, you're already one step in. So my challenge to you, if you're a staunch Christian, is read the book. Because here's my question to you. In a hypothetical situation, just hypothetical, if you were brainwashed, hypothetically now, I know you're going to say, no, I'm not. I know that. Hypothetically, if you were, would you not want to know it so that you don't live your life for something that isn't true? I know I would. So all I'm saying is, isn't it worth the risk to just read a book to make sure? That's my challenge to you as a Christian. If you're already questioning, read the book because this is going to help you answer all the questions you have. And if you're already on the other side, read the book because guarantee you there's some lingering things that I will help you escape and remove the lingering brainwashing that's holding on still that you may not even realize you have. Again, it's methodical. It flows. Just read it front to back. And let's see what happens.
So we got a few more super chats to look at. Johansson, thank you for your super chat. Who does the Church of Christ think the Kenites are today?
No idea. I'm not a Church of Christer. But that'd be a good question for Don Preston.
Eastgate Adoptionist, thank you for your super chat. If we only discover what's possible in math within a system that is already set, why do we have this infinite and virtual math layer to our reality? How can we say this reality is here without something intelligent?
I mean, why must we say it has to be something intelligent? I don't see any reason why that must be, but let's just hypothetically say it does have to be. Let's just grant that. Okay, it has to be something intelligent. Why does that intelligent being have to be Yahweh? See, that's my problem with the intelligent design argument. You can make cases all day long that science is wrong and it has to be something intelligent. Great. Let's roll with that. Even hypothetically saying you prove the case that it has to be intelligent designer. I've yet to see anybody use intelligent design to get all the way to God. Once again, you're just getting us to the 50-yard line. I need you to get me all the way and saying, well, you just have to have faith. That's not working.
We got one more super chat. Mr. Warlight, thank you for your super chat. Do Christians try to avoid the story in Judges 19?
I mean, I think Christians try to avoid a lot of stories. I suppose some try to avoid that one, yeah.
So where can people go find you in your work or videos if they want to follow you?
Sure. So if you go to YouTube, the Unraveler AB, for my initials, Alan Bondar, the Unraveler AB, or I guess it's at the Unraveler AB. Go to my YouTube channel. The link's also below, I believe. That's my personal channel. Currently, a man named William Vincent and I, he's a Christian, and I'm an atheist, and he wrote a book called The 10 Myths of Atheism. And of course, I wrote the book, How to Kill God the Easy Way. And so we are discussing our different views and going through the books and challenging one another and seeing if we can find some sort of a middle ground or a compromise. So that's a series I'm doing with him, and we're on the third show tomorrow night. So if you haven't watched the first, I encourage you to do that and come back tomorrow night live and watch that. So that's my personal channel. Love for you to come subscribe and be a part of that journey with us. Also, Birds of a Feather. That's a show that I do with my friend Dustin Curley. That show's a blast. We literally just show up and start talking. Whatever comes out, comes out. And once a month, we have a couple of guests, and we just chat with them. Our next, and we call that our flock. So the next show we have of our flock is 2 Christians, and then me and Dustin are atheists. So we're going to have a discussion as well. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So I encourage you to go to @Birds of a Feather, and this is going to be AD for Alan Dustin. Birds of a Feather AD. So that's where you'll find that. And then finally, I'm doing a show with Jen Fishburne right now. Her show, it's her channel called Answers from Genesis. And that's also in the link below. And we've been methodically going through my book chapter by chapter, but elaborating, and you're getting insights from her, stuff from me, things that we're, discussing that are not in the book. And there's things in the book that are not live. So, and that's been a really cool show because people have journeyed with us and they have questions, and it's been really, really enlightening and helpful. So I encourage you to definitely journey that, especially if you're going to read the book. Come hop on over there because you'll have a lot of fun tracking with us.
Now, I just have to bring this comment up real quick. This is hilarious. Hapetia Steinhope, thank you for this. He says, Hapetia says, Worf on Star Trek was once asked about the gods of Klingon cultures, and he said they killed all their gods.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Worf did say that. That's right. I think he said that in Deep Space Nine. I think that's the Star Trek show where he said that, if I remember correctly.
Well, I feel like today we had like a Universal Star Wars space type people asking questions. That was kind of crazy.
Yeah. And I want to remind everybody to also have the link to Alan's book in the description below, and it will also be in the pinned comment. And with that being said, thank you for joining me today, Alan.
Absolutely, Jacob. Thank you again for having me. Really appreciate it.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron. And or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.